Here, talking about harmonic rhythm and also some of that tension substitution with ninths and all that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about using triads and seventh chords and all that kind of thing. And I'm going to walk through this whole process. I kind of thought it out, so I'm going to walk through and redo it, but you'll see where we're going. So that's our end goal. So we're going to work through to that, starting with chords. So this is a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. I'm going to make my clip. Let's make it blue for fun. I'm going to make it 4 measures long. And I think I mentioned this in class, but I don't mind if you fold to a scale. We're going to work in C minor, so that's what that is. So if we literally say highlight the scale and then fold, we'll see, all right, we don't click fold, we click scale. And we're going to see just the notes of C minor. And what I can do then, so I'm going to change my grid to whole notes. You'll see that right there. It's really tiny. And now I'm going to start adding notes. Let's do the bass line first. So I'm just going to go down to C1, add that in. 5, 6, 4. And because we're folded to the scale, I can grab everything, copy it up like so, and then just go every other note, literally. Like these triads are built by using every other note, like that. I'm going to pull down the velocity on these a bit, so it's not quite so gang. Let's make it really chill. I'll turn everything off. So this should be just what we have so far. And I'm going to keep this on while we keep adding notes. Now you could go and do this, and I kind of have examples of this where you have it, whether it's voice led or not, then you add new notes. But I'm going to try to keep it here in root position just to make it really easy for you. So this is the first one. This is just triads. So now we'll copy that, and now this will be sevenths. So real simple. I'm just grabbing the top note of each one, and I move up again, and now I've got sevenths. All root position, but it's working good so far. So now what I want to do is add a couple tensions. So what I'm going to do is take this, copy it down, and we'll say ninths or something like that. Now I'm not going to do a ninth on every chord because I want to show you how you don't have to do that on every chord. Because remember, I've got the roots down here, and I'm not doing any bass line inversions, no slash chords at this point. I want to keep it basically very simple. So what I can do is essentially take any of those notes and just move them up one note in the scale, right? So I'm taking a note that's in the chord, like the C, and I already know it's there in the bass line, so I can take that and move it up to D. And so now let me go to that clip. There's my tension substitution. I put the 9 or 2, however you want to think about it, in place of the root note, but I know I have the root somewhere. And I'm going to skip this one because I feel like it, and I'll skip this one too, and I'll do it to this chord. So I'm just going to do it to a couple because you don't have to do it all the time. So I'm going to take the root note here, move that up as well. Now you could choose any of them. You could choose the 3 and make it the sharp 11. Whether or not you know it's a sharp 11 or not, it just kind of comes down to its relationship to the note above it. So if you want to know if that's a good idea or not, here, let me go back. So let's say I do this one. Let's say I go G to A flat. First of all, G and A flat are half step apart, but you may not know that. So I'm going to unfold to the scale, and you'll see that they're a half step apart. So in this case, when we unfold to the scale, we can notice when one of our tension substitutions is maybe going to cause a bit of an issue. In this case, when I go from C to D, it's a whole step above the chord tone below it, so it's going to be cool. But the G to the A flat is going to be a half step above the chord tone, so we might not like that. The E flat to F, that might be pretty chill too, although I don't want to necessarily get rid of the 3rd or the 7th, so it's usually the root of the 5th that I'm substituting more often than not. And so in any of these cases, we can see that. We can see the scale is highlighted. Obviously, I'm not going to move the root, but B flat to C would be chill. D to E flat might not be so hot, but F to, well, the F is the 7th, probably want to keep that. So we can see it pretty clearly when we unfold from the scale, but we keep our eye on where those scale tones are, which extensions might not work as well. So I'm choosing this one because it's a whole step, and I'm choosing this one because it's a whole step. We'll say ninths. Now we could do this one here just for fun. actually sounds pretty cool. We'll just leave it. I like it. So we got our ninths. You could do 11ths and 13ths, just have to experiment with them. Ninths are the most common, however. So when people talk about extensions, they're often talking about the ninth and then maybe the 11th or the 13th. So it just depends, but we'll just leave it ninths as for now. And you'll notice that the density of each chord is the same. Like nothing has changed in that regard. Like there's 4 notes in each voicing and there's a bass note. And so in these 3 chords, there's no root in the chord voicing. The root's down here. And then this one chord, I've got the root doubled, right? Which is fine. It doesn't really matter. It works great. So on we go. I'm going to duplicate that now. So at this point, what we could do would be to invert our chords, but I think I'm going to hold off on that for a little bit because we can invert at any point in time. It doesn't really matter. I just want to make sure that everything makes sense. And when we start to play with harmonic rhythm, we might add some chords. So if we're super inverted already, it might be difficult to do that. But I do have examples here of adding tensions when it is in root position or when it's voice led. I might make this like a project you can just download, or I'll just email you guys. These are chords that we're going to add in a sec. You can even add some suspensions. We'll talk about this in a second. But the basic idea is we've got this rough chord progression. Now the thing about it right now is each of these chords is a whole measure in length, right? But we don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to kind of change things up a bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make one of the chords longer. I'm going to make this chord be more than an entire measure in length. So I'm going to add what we call a dot to it. So to do that, I'm going to take the second chord. I'm going to make it short and move it over. And then I'm going to make this chord extended out like this. So we'll say, I don't know, harmonic rhythm, step 1. I don't know what to call it, but that should be fine. And what's happening is it gets a little bit hard to follow, right? When we start to play with harmonic rhythm, sometimes we make these changes, especially we start doing pushes and pulls and stuff, it starts to throw us off a bit. So at this point in time, it's not a bad idea to have like a metronome or something going. I'm going to use a kick drum because it's less annoying than a metronome. And that keeps us honest and it keeps us understanding where the pulse is in the music. Because if we don't do that, sometimes we lose our sense of where the pulse is. Now we're still folded to the scale. But at this point, I'm going to kind of get out of that because I want to start adding notes that are kind of interesting. And by that, what I mean is I want to add a new chord. So we made this chord shorter to make this chord longer. I'm going to take the last measure, so we'll call it step 2, and I'm going to actually add another chord. I'm going to add a different chord here. I'm going to take that, I'm going to duplicate this, but I'm going to make it a major chord. And to do that, right now it's still, still minor. Let's get rid of that. We don't need that right now. So right now this is a still minor chord. And you're going to hear that. Let me play this one. It's this chord twice, essentially. But I want to change that up. I want to do what we call a borrowed chord. So I'm going to unhighlight just the scale. And for this chord, I'm going to turn it into a major chord. So I look at the shape of it and I can see that there's 2 notes and 3 notes. I'm going to grab that note, I'm going to move it up a half step, and this is what you'll hear. And that creates a little bit more tension, and that resolves itself really nicely back to the 1 chord again. Now we could keep the 9 like we had it, but in this case, we could kind of have some fun with it too. I'm going to do something called a flat 9, like this. Check it out. And it adds a little bit of tension, a little bit of rub, and usually we generally recommend not using minor 9s or flat 9s in most of your chord voicings, but this is what we call a dominant chord. It has a major 3rd and a minor 7th that has that tritone in between those 2 notes, and that creates tension already. So adding a minor 9th, this would be a major 9th, by the way, which would not be in the scale that we're in, but the minor 9th is actually diatonic to C minor, so it's an easy thing to do. But now we've got this note that adds this tension, and it's a really nice tension. And it works really well specifically on dominant chords. So if that's something you do want to do in the future, Be My Guest. So right now what we've done is we've made one chord shorter to make one longer, and we've introduced another chord into our chord progression by making another chord shorter. And we could do anything with this. We could make it so that this chord lasts for only a quarter note, right? You could do this kind of thing. But as you'll see in the next step, it doesn't matter quite as much. Now you notice I forgot the bass line note, and we kind of, don't want to do that because then things kind of get off a little bit. Unless that's what you're into. That's fine too. I don't mind. You do you. So now we're going to take this to step 3, and we're going to start to introduce some really interesting stuff. We're going to introduce some suspensions. Now we kind of talked about suspensions in the past, and the basic idea is you can take a note and suspend its resolution in time. So you could have a note that keeps going until it resolves to another note. At this point, it's not a bad idea to start inverting our chords if we're going to start doing that kind of thing. But I'm actually going to do something even more interesting. Well, I don't know, more or less interesting. I'm going to suspend the entire chord. So what that means is, I'm going to change my resolution here to eighth notes. I'm going to take this entire chord, make it a little bit shorter, and then delay it by an eighth note. So now we have this gap, and it's going to create a lot of momentum and energy. Just check it out. So by being off the beat, it accentuates that chord's arrival, right? This is on an upbeat eighth note. And if we think of downbeats and upbeats, every first and third note in a subdivision would be a downbeat, and every second and fourth would be an upbeat. These are eighth note upbeats and downbeats. You can do it with quarter notes, you can do it with 16th. Any value, depending on what you're doing, can serve this function. So by putting it on an upbeat eighth note and delaying its entrance for an eighth note, it adds a little bit of weight to that entrance and makes it more interesting. And we could also do that over here with this chord, but let's do it by a quarter note. And then we could add like a snare hit or something like that there. Kind of interesting, right? So what we've done so far is we took one chord and made it half as long, so we can make one chord 1.5 of its length. Cool. It's a dotted, in this case, dotted whole note. Then in this one, we added a chord and we made it a quarter note in length, which is kind of a similar relationship. If you notice, like this is, if we have 4 sections, the first chord is 3 sections and the last chord is 1 section. And we have 3 sections here. It's just half as large of a section, right? So this one is 3 out of 4 pieces of a puzzle, if you will. And then in the third one, what we're doing here in step 3, we're adding suspensions, also called pulls. So someone says you're pushing or pulling your chords, that's what they're referring to. So we pulled this one an eighth note and we pulled this one a quarter note. So now we can have some fun by pushing or anticipating. So let's go to this guy. I'm going to call this an anticipation or a push. Whoops. Yep. So in this one, that's step, whoops, forgot that, step 4. All right. So now I'm going to anticipate this guy. I'm going to come in a little bit early. I'm going to take the entire chord and have it happen an eighth note early, and that's going to add even more energy. This one comes in late on an upbeat eighth note, and this one's going to come in early on an upbeat eighth note. And I could also do that over here, right? This one's coming in on a quarter note. Let's have that one come in a little bit earlier as well. We could have it come in on a quarter note early, but then it's kind of like just switching those roles. So I thought this sounded more interesting to my ears. Check it out. And the pushing and the pulling of these harmonies really adds a lot of energy and surprise to our chord progressions. Now, if we go back up here to the regular whole note chords, right, like each chord is 1 bar, there's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. It has this predictability to it, but it can be kind of less interesting. Whereas we do all these things where we make some of the chords longer and shorter at different values, we add some pushes and some pulls, it gets much more exciting. Now at this point, we could start to invert things because we've added all of our chords, we've played with everything the way we want to. So we're just looking at these relationships and we're saying, well, we could do that. That seems to be the same note. We could maybe move these guys up here, kind of like that. So let's go back down here. So this is inversions, can't spell, or voice leading. You'll notice that guy sounds a little bit funky with those two notes on top. So I might actually take those up here. Or if I want like a lower register, I can take all of those down. I could take all of these down if I wanted to, right? I can play with where those notes are. And I don't have to be really, really strict with it. And to kind of make that a bit more clear, I have another version down here where it doesn't look like it's voice led much at all. But what I'm doing is I really liked what the top note of each chord was. So let me switch this one off and just play this one for you. So these are the same chords. Like pretty much everything is the same, but the way it's voice led here, I've changed these voicings into very sort of particular and common voicings that you hear, but I'm really focusing on this melodic line. And so what I'm doing here also is I am going to accentuate them by bringing those notes out a little bit with velocity. They're up at 80, and these are all like 64, as you can see. So when I play it, check it out. So ultimately, voice leading is about creating musicality, right? And there is such a thing as sort of pure or perfect or whatever voice leading, where you're really focused on just making sure that all the notes that are the same in each chord are lined up together, right? And that's very useful in a very functional way. We can see those relationships clearly. We know when notes could be suspended or not into the next chord and have a meaningful impact. But ultimately, when you're creating music, you want to create the most compelling music you can. And if you have a top line to your harmony that you like, you can supposedly, say breaking voice leading. It's not really the case. You're just utilizing voice leading to achieve an end goal, right? And you'll notice between each group of chords, things are voice led well. Like this is voice led fine. This is voice led fine between those two chords. And these breaks create these natural spaces where we can almost quote unquote break away from what we were doing before with our voice leading. If we wanted to make it much more like pure in that sense, we could do that. So those notes are the exact same note and everything is, a whole step away. But I liked the sound of those notes being on top. And so it's not that there's a rule to be broken, it's understanding how to utilize the technique to achieve the desired effect. If you know how to use inversions to create voice leading, you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't matter. So ultimately have that voice leading, and I have the bass notes in octaves because it sounds a bit more full. And I like the way that sounds. I like those voicings. This is a really common voicing for a rootless minor ninth chord. As an example, this is a pretty common voicing for an altered dominant chord as well, which we'll get into later on in the quarter. But yeah, so hopefully this is kind of gives you an idea of how you can go about creating your chord progressions, adding sevenths, adding ninths, or whatever, using the tension substitution method. You can also add it on top. That's fine as well. And then most importantly is harmonic rhythm, taking some chords, making them longer, adding different chords of different lengths, adding suspensions harmonically, so the entire chord is either being pushed or is being pulled back in time, or anticipating a chord coming in a little bit early, right? We call these sort of unofficially pushes, pushing and pulling your rhythm. You can use any values. You can do quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes even. Eighth notes are very common, sometimes quarter notes, and then occasionally 16th notes. It really adds like a pop of energy. And then you voice lead either very purely, actually this would probably go down here if you want to be super pure, or you can use your voice leading technique to support some sort of upper melodic line in the music that you're creating. As long as you understand how to do it and the technique is there for you, you can use that idea to achieve any goal that you want musically. Hopefully that helped. Hopefully that made sense. Ask me questions in class. And that's it. Peace.